from this seat, and we're going to have Bob and Steve go and start. It's all yours, guys.
Very good. Thanks, Jörg. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. Some of you as we get into this, will recognize some of the parts and pieces because you probably attended any one of the 3 or 4 tailwheel seminars that we have done here at CubAir at Hartford in the last 4 or 5 years. So with that, let's get into the first one here. Tailwheel airplanes, what can go wrong? And look at that mess right there. And if you've watched any of the news here or subscribed to any of the accident services, um, you've seen that this has happened with some regularity. One that made the news most recently was that beautiful, beautiful Aviat Husky that AOPA was using for a sweepstakes airplane that got wiped out on the way to Oshkosh this year. And it was attributed to, according to the pilot, his shoelace got caught in the rudder pedal. And as a result, ran off the runway and took out the gear, took out a wing, and basically made a mess of a beautiful airplane. So, okay, golden rules for flying, tailwheel flying. Go ahead, Bob.
Yep. And you can see right there, they're pretty simple. You have to use your feet as well as your hands, as well as your head. So use the rudder pedals. In a tailwheel airplane, it wants to fly. It's at a good angle to fly. So you want to keep that stick back and keep the tail on the ground. And I come back to my favorite, rules free. Keep it straight. C rule number 1, use the rudder pedals.
Go ahead.
So this is something that people don't think about too often, but where is the CG? Think about where the mains are located, and that'll give you a really good idea. If you're tracking straight, don't get too relaxed because you got that big old rudder back there. You got the fuselage, and if the wind is not your friend that day, the only control you're going to have is via the rudder because guess what? It's steering that little old tail wheel. So stay with it. Don't let it get away from you. And if you're not straight, the CG wants to get ahead of the pivot point now.
Okay, so as Bob said, rule number 1 equals rule number 3. Use the rudder. Here's a problem that we run into frequently when individuals come here to get a tailwheel endorsement. And this applies to anybody with 50 or 60 hours up through airline pilots with thousands of hours, and they come here to get a tailwheel endorsement. Many of them have trained in aircraft that the rudder usage is secondary to practically non-existent. And the hardest thing that we have to do is get them to wake their feet up and use the rudder pedals and be able to feel and anticipate what the airplane is doing and what you need to do to correct it. We have one primary rule here when we start out with individuals, and that is with a tailwheel airplane, regardless of wind, you never stop flying a tailwheel airplane from the time the engine starts in front of the hangar until the engine stops in front of the hangar.
So what about the brakes? We find this is a major problem. And as you can see, we teach it a little bit different. We only use the brakes for 3 primary functions. And you can see startup, run up, and possibly shut down. There is one other item. Sometimes on some of these different airplanes, you do need to hit a little brake to break the tail wheel loose so that you can make a tight turn. But overall, we want to keep your feet away from those brakes unless you're in one of those first 3 major points. When else would you might need brakes? Well, bad tail wheel.
Mm-hmm.
The old style drum brakes, which we have on our Cubs here, and the Champs, they're pretty useless. Yeah. The newer disc brakes, they're much superior as far as being able to slow that wheel from turning. So you have two problems. One, the old drum brake just doesn't want to work. And two, the newer disc brake are just too good. So once again, I go back to what I said originally. Use the brakes for what they were intended, not to help you out. You've got the controls. Remember, stick back for best control and to avoid what's on that picture right there.
Bob, one of the things that I'd like to bring up here right at this point is the individuals that come to us, particularly if they've been flying tricycle gear airplanes up to this point, and this is something that goes back and reflects a lot on the instructors, I think, and that is they've learned to taxi with about 2,000 RPMs and riding the brakes all the way to the runway. And that doesn't work so good with tailwheel airplane. What, as Bob mentioned, what we try to do here and insist on is you need to be able to stay ahead of the airplane and you need to feel the airplane so that you don't need brakes to get yourself out of trouble. Now that's a rule that doesn't always hold true. It's going to depend on the wind that you're taxiing in, whether it's a headwind, crosswind, quartering tailwind, or whatever. As this slide states here, during a taxi you deal with wind, and we have the old rule of climb into the wind and dive away from the wind. And it's amazing to me. I was taught that 50 some years ago, and you try to explain that to a new young student, and they just never heard of that. And then, well, what way direction is the wind from? And you have to take them out and explain the windsock to them sometimes.
So as far as the taxiing goes, the surface type you're on, for example, hard surface versus an unimproved, which we have both here, present different problems, different braking, different, usually the grass strip is a little bit wider, so that gives you a little extra room. But this next point is the power level. How much power does it take to taxi? And we teach what we call energy management, which means that you're controlling your speed with the power. So that's something you might try practicing on whatever kind of airplane you're working, and forget about those brakes a little bit more. Very important at an airport like ours here, where we have a large volume of training aircraft. We have transient aircraft. We have gliders. We have the medevac. And we have choppers from the National Guard. So other traffic and the use of the proper use of the communications is really important. And finally, the pre-takeoff preparation. How many of you have an idea of how far down the road you're going to go on that runway before you realize, well, maybe I can't get off? So I want you to have a place that if you're not at flying speed, stop.
Okay. Other takeoff factors that we want to consider and we teach, and that is how to deal with the winds and the crosswinds. And what is the crosswind component as far as the airplane that you're flying that day? Things like on a 200-foot wide runway like we have, if you've got a good stiff crosswind, I'd like to teach a more advanced student that, if you start out on the very northeast corner of the runway and the angle about 15 degrees to your right on a 1/8 takeoff, you can lessen that crosswind component by sometimes 10 degrees and 10 knots, and very comfortably be well within the limitations of the crosswind limitations on your aircraft. The other thing you want to take into consideration is climb performance, and that's something that we especially have to deal with here in the last probably 4 or 5 weeks. We've had unusually warm, humid weather, so performance of the aircraft is very important, along with dealing with the crosswinds. Maybe yesterday when it was 70 degrees, you were 200 feet above the water tower that was a half mile off the end of the runway. Today, with that crosswind and trying to keep it straight, and it's 91 degrees and 70% humidity, that water tower looks like it's kind of getting to be real big in the windshield. So you need to take those kinds of things into consideration. Runway, as Bob mentioned earlier, are you taking off on hard surface? Is it a rough hard surface? Is it an old runway with lots of cracks and bumps in it? Is it a brand new resurfaced runway? Is it a turf runway? And if so, is it tall grass, short grass? Is it wet grass? Are you operating off of a runway, turf runway that underwent a 2-inch rain at midnight the night before? So, want to take those things into consideration and have a plan to abort if needed.
So let's go back to our rules. The 3 rules were, and that could be a test, but in any case, this is the one we're looking at. Rule number 3, you want to keep it straight with the rudder, but you need to use additional aileron into whatever wind that you might have out there to help keep that airplane straight. The wind comes up, or the wing comes up rather. You may not have enough rudder authority to stop it without doing that. And hence you might see some parts of the country you hadn't planned. So the 3 rules, keep it straight.
Okay, so here's what we like to do when we say we teach not only attitude flying, but develop a feel for the airplane you're flying. All right, so we start with our step 1 on the takeoff. We start with the stick all the way back, and that sometimes is very hard for people to get used to. And the reason being for that is from the time you add power until you're up to a full power setting and have picked up some ground speed, your only directional control at that point is with that tiny little wheel in the back. So often I see people when I start working with them that have had a little bit of tailwheel time, the first thing they do is as fast as the power comes in, that stick comes forward. Now, if you got a crosswind, you're in about 5 seconds of no man's land there because the rudder is ineffective and that tail wheel is off the ground. So we see issues with that happening with some regularity. So we start out with the stick all the way back, ease the power forward, and when you start to feel a little bit of a load on the elevator, you start to ease the stick forward to about the neutral position, not slamming it all the way forward. What we want to do is raise the tail, but raise the tail about a foot off of the ground, and that's all. Now you're in a very positive angle of attack, and you're using the rudder to keep it straight, and you continue to accelerate, and off we go. That tail will, with the tail low, you've got that positive angle of attack. So when that airplane is ready to fly, it flies. Don't bother to look at the airspeed indicator because that's inaccurate because of that angle anyway. So you feel the airplane, and it will treat you very well.
I want to add in on this particular point. We try to teach not a movement of the stick as much as a feel for the stick. So please try to feel what you're doing with that airplane and let it try to talk back to you a little bit. We run into this all the time with people that when you tell them you got to move the stick, well, it's either all or none. That doesn't work. And then if you tell them you got to be a little bit more gentle with the stick, now they've gone the opposite way and it's too gentle and it's not accomplishing it. So really the only way you can do it is to feel the airplane. It's what we teach here. It's called attitude flying, and it applies not only to your head, but to the airplane.
One mistake that individuals often make at this stage, and that is because in a three-point attitude on most airplanes, you can't see over the nose. And a pilot, for some reason, they're used to be sitting in a 172 and seeing over the nose. You get them in a tailwheel airplane and say, okay, you start out with stick back and ease it forward. The tail comes off, keep the tail low and keep it in that nice positive angle of attack and it'll fly right off. The first thing they want to do is push that stick forward so they can see over the nose. Now you're in a neutral, or in some cases with some airplanes, even a negative angle of attack. And I'll tell them when we're taking off to the north here, I said, if you're going to leave it in that attitude, we're going to be driving this thing on the ground all the way to Fond du Lac rather than flying. And Fond du Lac's 33 miles away. So you've got to keep to do it smoothly and positively. It's very easy. Keep the tail low. The airplane will take care of itself and it'll fly when it's ready. You don't have to sit there and stare at a gauge or a herky-jerky on the stick.
And I think Steve has just covered that pretty well on this slide. Just think about moving a stick rather than physically pushing it an inch here or a quarter inch there. Just let the airplane do what it wants, and that's it. It wants to fly. And once you're off the ground, then you can pitch up and get yourself in line with whatever comes next. And we have to talk a little bit about all of the items that you're going to be fighting with, or not fighting, but controlling on the takeoff. And these 4 items that you see listed are really important. Now, everybody knows about P factor, but how many people think about if the airplane is on a 3-point stance, what kind of P factor are we going to get when we put in that power? So you're in a high angle of attack, which increases the P factor. Therefore, you're going to need to use that rudder. Again, what you need, no more and no less. People don't think about the slipstream. This film, or rather this picture, shows right off the bat what happens to the air coming off of that propeller. You can see it spiraling. Well, guess where it hits? So once again, you have something else to contend with. Engine torque. Well, the prop is turning to the right on American airplanes or American engines, and equal and opposite reaction. So there's another one. And then the gyroscopic precession. Yep, it applies to the airplane just as well as it does to the old gyro instruments.
Okay, here's a little exercise that you can do. And it's one that we incorporate from time to time. It works very well. But take and tape about a 1-foot-long piece of yarn to the center lower spot on your windshield. And if you are in a good coordinated flight attitude, that string will be nice and straight. If you're skidding or slipping or yawing or an uncoordinated setup here, that string is going to tell you right away that you are not coordinated. You don't see this very often on airplanes. You see it all the time on gliders, for those of you that may have had something to do with getting some glider time or what have you. They do it frequently there. But if you have, as an instructor, if you have a student that's having a hard time feeling the airplane, this string idea will really help. The other thing that we really like to do to help a student really develop a feel for the coordinated inputs of aileron and rudder, and that is the maneuver called the Dutch roll. And that is nothing more than rotating the airplane about the longitudinal axis, about a 20 to 30 degree bank left, followed by a 20 to 30 degree bank right, while keeping the nose pointed at an exact spot on the horizon. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
This is one of my favorite, the stabilized approach. And we're big on that because, especially with tailwheel, if it's not stabilized, the end result may not be what you're expecting. So what is a stabilized approach? Well, you have to go back and ask yourself, what controls airspeed and what controls altitude? And we call it pitch, power, and airspeed. So we teach a stable approach in that the basic airfoil is going to be in the best glide attitude. And on these high wings, most of the high wing tail wheel, the bottom of the wing is going to be just about parallel to the horizon. That's going to give you a very close approximation of the best glide. Having said that, that leaves only the power left to maintain your altitude. So if you're a little bit low, you're going to add a little bit of power. If you're a little bit high, you're going to take a little bit of power off. This is going to go right back to the feel for the airplane and energy management. And one of the best exercises we have that we use here is a power off 180, because if you're not stabilized and you haven't figured out the energy management for that individual airplane, you're not going to be able to make that runway. So that's one that you might practice. Crosswinds, it's the same thing. We teach the crab method primarily because it shows you where the wind is coming. So you don't really need a windsock or anything else. The airplane is telling you exactly what you need. And the runway conditions we've already talked about, especially on anything other than a hard surface. The runway condition can really be important. For example, the morning dew on that grass out there can make things a little slick. Will it help you on the braking if you need it? You're going to have to figure this out and find out.
Two things I'd like to add there, Bob, and that is on the crosswinds. And we get asked this question from practically every individual that comes through here that is coming here for a tailwheel endorsement. I said, okay, we're going to do crosswinds. And they'll say, well, how do you like to do them? Do you use the crab approach or the wing down opposite rudder approach? Well, we teach it both ways so that you understand how it works. However, from my experience, I much prefer the crab approach. To me, that provides for a much more stable approach, particularly if the air is a little bit bumpy or choppy. If you're in that cross control attitude, you're keeping it there and you're constantly having to make corrections because you might get a little bit of a gust and then it lets up. So you're constantly picking it up, laying it down, adding rudders. And to me, that just makes a lot of work out of trying to maintain a stable approach. So the good crab angle all the way in, to me, makes for a much more stabilized approach and a safer landing.
I'd add one little thing to that, and that's what happens when you get close to the ground if you're in that slip attitude. Well, close to the ground in the ground effect, which for a number just to use is approximately 1.5 times the wingspan. So just say 75 feet or something on that. Once you get in that ground effect layer, the wind is going to change. It's going to change in direction and it will change in velocity. And that's all local terrain, Coriolis. There's a whole bunch of things that can affect that, hanger lines. So if you're in a crab, you're going to end up having to change, or a slip approach. You're going to have to change it anyways. Here, you only have to, with the crab approach, you only do it once.
Okay. Okay. Two types of landings that we do in teaching tail wheels. There's a 3-point or full stall landing, and then there's also the wheel landing. In the 3-point landing, we teach the approach. And the way I like to do it is, all right, you've been flying a 152 or 172. Think in terms of how you handle a soft field landing in 172. We're going to come in with a stabilized approach. And then as you reach about that 10-foot point off the ground, you apply back pressure to level and reduce that rate of descent. And in a tailwheel airplane, now you're going to make eye transition and not be looking over the nose anymore, but about 30 degrees to the left and the right. And now you can sense that airplane is starting to settle. And we want to play that game with trying to hold it off as long as we can. For every foot that we go down, we want to add a little more back pressure and slow that rate of speed down so that if you can make the perfect 3-point landing, it would be a zero descent, zero speed, flight speed. And once on the ground, this is where we run into big issues with tricycle people. They're so used to once on the ground, just letting go of the control stick or the control column and just letting it roll out. Well, that's where you get into big, big trouble in a tailwheel airplane. You keep that stick back. The reason for that, it keeps the tail, the air over the elevator is helping keep that tail on the ground. And now at that speed, those wings are in a stall configuration. So even if you hit some rough turf and it bounces you in the air, you're going to come right back down. The mistake that many people make is they either let go of it or they feel a bump and right away they relax the back pressure. Oh, now the tail comes up a foot. Now that wing is in a flight attitude again or generating some lift, and it just exaggerates the bounce. The best thing you can do on a bouncing or rough runway is get the stick back and hold it back and ride out the bumps. The landing gear is designed to take that beating up and down. It doesn't like the beating left and right. It wants to be, is very durable for the up and down. So keep that yoke all the way back. Okay, and some of the mistakes that we've seen here, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but students, when you tell them that they have to level off and flare, they don't look off to the side. They try to keep looking over the nose. Well, once you're entered your flare, you've lost sight of the runway, and now you have no idea if you're 3 feet or 10 feet off of the runway. That leads to dropping in or a very hard landing, and all as a result of the wrong sight picture. And as it says at the bottom, this can sometimes lead to a very interesting ride through the tulies.
So the wheel landings is just a little bit different because your attitude is going to be different. So as you can see, you're going to be just slightly faster than you would with the 3-point. You'll be in a low pass attitude, level or tail very slightly down. And you're going to use, again, the throttle to control the descent, the stick for the speed. So once the wheels touch down, you're going to think about a slight forward pressure. So I will not tell you that you have to move the stick. I want you to think about it. Otherwise, the tail's liable to come down. That brings the nose up and increases the angle of attack. And guess what? You're up and moving again. So as the airplane slows on the ground, you want to relax your pressure on that stick. You're going to just keep letting it go more toward a neutral position and so forth. When it finally gets to the point where that tail surface cannot keep that tail up, it's going to bring it down gently. And now you can work that stick back. And this is a common error at that point in the wheel landing. They lose patience. Again, we're talking about feel. Fly the airplane, pressure that stick back, and again, you've got to end up with the stick all the way back to keep the wheel down.
Okay. Okay, and for correcting for crosswind, we've talked a little bit about this earlier, but again, the mistake that we frequently experience with students and individuals with a lot of experience. We can get them to set up for using a crab angle for the approach, but they're so used to flying a tricycle gear that once the mains touch down, whether it's 3-point or wheel, they let go not only of the stick, but they relax on the rudder as well. They forget that even though we're rolling along, the wind hasn't let up. So now we're in a situation that can very easily put you in. You see the picture at the left. I've seen that on two different times out here at Hartford in T6s that they quit flying it as soon as it touched. And that was about what it looked like right there on that left hand. So you've got to keep flying that airplane. You stay on the rudders, you keep the stick back, you roll that stick as you're slowing up. You've got some crosswind correction by rolling the stick into the direction of the wind as you touch down and rolling out. As you get slower and slower, it takes more correction and more correction to keep it on the center line. And you're working that rudder, and you can come almost to a stop, and that wind is still blowing. So you've got to stay on that rudder and continue on the rudder and repositioning those ailerons from the time that you're ready to turn off the runway until it's stopped in front of the hangar.
So losing directional control. We like to teach what is listed there as the 3 up, throttle up, tail up, and straighten up. And that puts you in a prime position to just go around. Once again, it's not necessarily physically moving the stick from one end to the other. It's pressure. Let the airplane tell you what it needs for what you want it to do.
Okay, and finally, some of the things that we preach here. Number one, to keep truly proficient, you can't be proficient if you only go out there and fly once every 4 to 6 weeks. We can, and we've discussed it among ourselves, whether it's Bob and myself that have flown thousands of hours or individuals with only a couple hundred hours. I can tell it in myself. If I haven't been in an airplane for 3 or 4 weeks and I go out to fly, I can tell I'm a little bit rusty. And what I like to do there is go out and do some steep turns, a little slow flight, couple stalls, and man, I've got it back again. And the other thing is personal minimums. We teach that, work on that very hard here with students, but I'm concerned that many of you out there have probably forgotten all about personal minimums and what are the conditions that are go and no go for you, or what are you comfortable with? And if you're only comfortable on Sunday mornings when the sun is up and it's dead calm, so be it. But maybe you need to find an instructor and practice a little bit on maybe some crosswinds midday and expand those minimums a little bit. It's up to you. It all depends on the type of flying you do. But I like to work with individuals to expand their minimums, not because they have to do it, but I always use the example of this. At 6 o'clock in the morning, you jump in your Champ or your Cub or what have you, or your Cessna 170, and you fly 50 miles away to go have runny pancakes, runny eggs, bad coffee, and all that mess you've just eaten. And you've looked at airplanes, and now it's 10 o'clock, and you start to look around and you find out, ooh, the wind is 15, gusting to 18, and it's about a 20-degree crosswind at my home airport. Yeah, so you take off and you head for home, and all of the way home, your stomach is rumbling because you're nervous, and it's really rumbling because of those runny pancakes and runny eggs. So, in order to prevent you from having that issue, work with us a little bit on expanding your personal minimums so that it's only the runny pancakes that you have to deal with and not the upset stomach because you're nervous.
I would like to add on the personal minimums. here at the school, we actually have a form that we have the student fill out prior to their check ride on their personal minimums. And we're working at that personal minimums. And I want to make note that is not the demonstrated crosswind as an example that's listed in your operator's handbook. It is your personal minimums, and the only way you can find that is through experience and through the help of your instructors. I can't stress enough that everybody should have, if not on a piece of paper, they should be able to tell me right now what that personal minimum is going to be.
Yep. Completely agree. Very good.
Gentlemen, I thank you very much for your thoughtful information, and I am going to hand it over to you, Mick, if you want to go ahead on mute, and we are going to have you come up on the PowerPoint. I will let you know when I see it, Mick.
Okay, sounds good. And we'll go here.
Remember to go to share on the taskbar. There, it's coming. Yep,
Okay.
you're getting there. There you go. All right, all we need to do is put in slide presentation. You are good to go, Mick.
Okay, very good. And Bob and Steve, I was weaned in a tailwheel airplane and got about 7,500 hours in it. And one of the biggest things I guess I'm going to say about tailwheel airplanes is currency, currency, currency. So, anyway, my topic here for this evening is moving from legacy avionics. And I guess it depends on when you were born, whether what is legacy avionics. For me, it's super homers and omnigators. And so that takes me back a while in the number of years that I've been flying here. So anyway, moving on to the next slide here, give you an idea of what I do. And I'm the program manager for Bonanza Baron Pilot Training Program. I was an instructor with the program before I became the manager. The best part of it I like is, of course, getting the chance to go fly with people. Started flying in 65, got over 21,000 hours, 12,000 in instruction, and I'm going to say over 7,000 in tailwheels, and got an airline transport pilot certificate, and also instructor ratings. And I also owned and operated a two-way radio shop for 6 years for police and fire, and so I guess I have to say that I'm kind of a geek when it comes to avionics and stuff like that. And right now, of course, I'm specializing in instrument ratings and checkouts. I have a P-35 Bonanza and a Piper Cub seaplane. And also, I'm a ham radio operator. Okay, how am I going to go ahead and make this presentation? Okay, we're going to focus on some of the modern avionics, and we're going to put emphasis on the Garmin GFC 500 autopilot. And there's a lot of stuff to go ahead and talk about. Glitches and gatyas. these are items of concern and things that you should be aware of. And I tell you, I've sure seen my share of them in the instrument training that I've been doing. We talked about saving your questions to the end. Try to remember the slide number and that associated with the question when you ask the question. And I don't think we're going to have time here at the end for verbal questions, but we'll see that I get written copies of them here, and we'll go ahead and try to answer those for you. And by the way, on the bottom of the slide in the right-hand corner is the slide number. Okay. What are the equipment limitations? Well, this is one of the things here that when you're sending a flight student in for an instrument rating, the importance is if that airplane is a technically advanced airplane, that they are very familiar with the autopilot supplement to their pilot operating handbook. And I really stress that because we're going to see that a little later in the presentation. We're going to talk some about the redundancy of the avionics. So, where is this coming from? How is this working, et cetera, et cetera. And we talked about earlier on, Jurg mentioned autopilot pre-flights and tests. You got to go ahead and do these. You got to know that it's working properly. And we're going to do a sample approach using a Garmin GFC 500 autopilot. And we're also going to cover some issues that pilots and instructors encounter. And those are the items that I actually call the glitches and the gotchas. And after the presentation is over, hopefully you can sort out the difference between a glitch and a gotcha. Because of the time constraint here, I'm not going to be able to cover everything that I'd like to cover. And so there's going to be some items I'm not going to be covering here. One of them I'm going to mention here is autopilot emergencies. I will touch a little bit on partial panel approaches. Other things, there's just so much to this modern avionics here that there's just not going to be the time limit that we're trying to stay within. Okay, technically advanced airplanes. Okay, one of the things we're going to be using the FITS training program, which is an industry program that works with the FAA and with pilots to go ahead and try to train others. And one of the things that you never want to see is your avionics go ahead and letting you down just at the wrong time. Technically advanced aircraft, technically advanced avionics. This is a clip from a flying magazine in the 1940s. Early on, there was a corporation that was formed called Air Inc. And prior to 1950, aircraft transmitted, received, and operated on frequencies between 3 and 6 megahertz. A whole lot different than our frequencies that we're going ahead and using today. And boy, yes, we have really come a long way. The technology that we need in order to go ahead and fly the airplanes. And you look at this type of panel, and for some of you, you probably look at this and say, hey, this is a fairly modern panel here. And of course, you look over at the right-hand side and you see that Cessna 480F in there, and you say, well, this panel here has been around for a while, and a lot of people are doing panel upgrades. And then, of course, our panels come out looking something like this, hopefully. And also, you're probably $100,000 poorer on your budget. Are you, as an instructor, competent? Now, I took this clip from, and you notice the AC that is dated 1974. It says that training should be conducted by a competent flight instructor who is certified in the class of airplane and they're familiar with the make, model, characteristics. Prior to, we were working with fuel systems. how the fuel systems, how the hydraulic systems go ahead and work. And so that's what we were dealing with as flight instructors back in 1974. And I remember many cases there. By the way, you could have a beach Bonanza that has 7 fuel tanks. So how do you get the fuel from the tank to the engine? Well, now we have to start going ahead and not being just competent on the airplane itself, but we also have to be competent on the avionics suite. And there's a lot of new buzzwords that are out there. Technically advanced airplanes, we all know what that is. Flight management systems, heads-up displays, looking at some other things. We're talking about the toga button, flight level changes, and we can go on and on with this new vocabulary. And the person that hasn't been updated on all of this, they're not going to have any idea what some of this verbiage actually goes ahead and means. Nobody can maintain expertise on all of these different systems that are out there. Everyone is a little bit different. Hopefully, in most cases, there's some standards that have been put together. And I mentioned Air Inc. Early on. And they actually have what they refer to as an Air Inc. bus. I think it's 429, which allows these different boxes here to go ahead and communicate with one another. Connecting the practices that you know with the technology that you're going to encounter. And I'm going to say this is really very important. Don't go ahead and give up on the things that you had been doing all these years. In other words, we use certain acronyms, we do certain things, certain places. For example, glide slope intercept, we run through the GUMP checklist and make sure that we've got the landing gear down and the airplane is configured for landing. These are the same practices that you can continue on, whether you're using the new technology or you're going ahead and dealing with some new equipment that you have in the airplane. This is something really brought forward. The National Transportation Safety Board went ahead and said that our glass panel equipped airplanes are not safer than those equipped with the conventional steam gauges. And so they went on and said, and I'm not going to go ahead and read all of this for you, but they did an accident study, and the study was conducted from 2002 to 2006 when we first started seeing a lot of these changes in the avionics. And so there's some other things that they went ahead and suggested. They suggested pilots not familiar with the unique features of the glass cockpits were the leading cause of higher accident rates. And this has really been true here across the board, and there's several reasons for that. However, the purpose of this seminar is to go ahead and reduce airplane accidents. And so this is what the safety board suggested. Appropriate training on these complex systems is the only way that we can go ahead and make these glass cockpits safer. Let's take a quick look here at some of the modern autopilots that we're starting to see on the market in our light aircraft. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, my emphasis is going to be on the Garmin GFC 500. So there are some differences, and we'll go ahead and we'll talk about them. And you also notice the one down at the bottom there is not a Garmin product. It's the S-Tech 3100. I have had very little experience, but I've had some experience with it, and I have to say I do like it. It's a pretty nice box. Showing again, we're talking about the GFC 500 autopilot. We're looking at the controller that we have here. And if you saw the little video that was on before our program started here from Sporty's Pilot Shop, it covered a lot of the functions of the autopilot and things to go ahead and do. And it showed them hooked up to this is the G5 on the left. But one of the things that I guess that I'm going to say is there are a lot of options of equipment that can go together. Now, a lot of times when pilots are upgrading their airplane, and I'm seeing all these $100,000 panels that we've got that are out there, and people are going ahead and putting them in. They get them on in there, and then they don't know how to go ahead and use them. And you can go ahead and go through the manuals. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little farther on. And you can also go ahead and watch videos like the one that we had shown previously from Sporty's Pilot Shop. So these are just a few of the navigators that we're going ahead and interfacing with the 500 autopilot. And the one up there in the upper left-hand corner, that's the one that I have in my aircraft right there. You'll probably see some of the boxes on up there if you recognize them. And now they're becoming what you call legacy, depending on what you look at as legacy avionics. But you got the Garmin 430 and 530. And according to Garmin, those are now end of life. To go along with the navigators themselves, we have the displays. We have the glass displays. And I want to point out particular attention to the upper center one right there. And you notice here we have a glass display, and that glass display is configured with steam gauges. So as a flight instructor, and I've had this happen on numerous occasions, before you can go ahead and do all the button pushing, if you're doing an instrument rating with me, what you have to go ahead and do is prove that you can actually fly the airplane on instruments. And we get pilots that just had these upgraded avionics and they're used to steam gauges. And now we've got some glass that we're working with, and they cannot hold their altitude plus or minus 500 feet. It is amazing to just watch this. Now, one particular gentleman, he was a little bit better than some. He was plus or minus 300 feet. Did you know that you can take these glass displays and you can put them in a configuration of the steam gauges? By going ahead and doing this on several occasions, that pilot on the very next flight that couldn't hold 300 feet altitude plus or minus now was holding it within 50 feet after I switched the panel on over to the steam gauges. And it tells you in the manual how you can go about doing that. So that's something very, very important that we need to point out. You're going to take somebody, they're going in for a flight test. And the things that the pilot examiner is going to ask them, what do you know about the autopilot supplement? And so this is an example. I took some pages out of a customer's autopilot supplement that recently did his instrument rating with me. And you notice in the supplement, they go ahead and they tell you how things are interfaced and what particular devices are connected to that. And I'm going to show you several pages of it. And there's going to be a few things in here that are going to be very surprising to you. Okay, so now here they've gone ahead and they've checked what modes of the autopilot, and this is for a G5, a GFC 500 autopilot. It shows what modes that autopilot is capable of flying. Now, in this particular case, this autopilot was hooked to a Garmin 430, and you notice that they have all of the functions that are on in there. One of them, of course, being a yaw damper. Sometimes that's an optional thing. It really is a great add-on on the 500 autopilot. Okay, limitations. Oh my goodness, we have limitations. So if you went ahead and you bought a brand new Cessna 182 and it has, we'll say, a G1000 avionics suite in it, and you went ahead and you bought a Beechcraft with the same G1000 avionics suite in it, they are not necessarily going to perform the same. And this was an interesting thing that you need to be aware of so that you don't get one of these situations where you get yourself in trouble. That it's actually the manufacturer of the airplane that goes ahead and sets up the parameters of the autopilots. And then, of course, the manufacturer of the autopilot programs it to a particular software version. Now, here we have a situation right here where there are different boxes here that can be connected to this particular G500 autopilot, and then it goes ahead and shows what software version is approved. That version or later is FAA approved, depending on whether you're running a G5 or a G3X or a 275 as a controller. The other item, and we'll get that in just a moment here, but let's take a look at the requirements here for the autopilot here. For the GFC 500 autopilot, first of all, it says in the supplement, a pilot must be seated in the left pilot seat with a seatbelt fastened during all autopilot operations. That's something I guess that we maybe would take for granted, but I guess that means you can't fly it from the right seat. Do not use the autopilot or yaw damper during takeoff or landing. And we'll get into, there's a little bit of a glitch there that we have. I shouldn't say a glitch. I'm going to call that one a gotcha that we'll look at on that a little bit later on. GFC pre-flight tests must be completed prior to the use of the autopilot or flight director. On the GFC 500, when you turn the avionics on, it goes through the test automatically, and then it goes ahead and it gives you acknowledgement that the test has been completed. On my situation with my airplane, I have a switch that I have to flip to the test position, and that takes almost a minute as it goes through the different test functions prior to me using that autopilot. Maximum fuel imbalance. Minimum engagement airspeed. I want to back up. I missed one here. We also have an autopilot maximum engagement airspeed, and that varies from airplane to airplane. The autopilot must be disengaged below 200 feet AGL during approach operations. This one here kind of blew me away. The autopilot must be disengaged below 800 feet above ground level for all operations other than approaches. A common thing a lot of people will go ahead and do, and I guess I've been a victim of that, is before I take off, I go ahead and I hit the toga button and set the pitch attitude, and everything is all ready for the departure before I take off on the runway. I usually do that on the runway and what have you. And then shortly after takeoff, everything looks good. I may engage the autopilot. It says right here, you do not engage that autopilot below 800 feet unless you're on an approach. Okay, and it also goes ahead and says the GFC 500 is approved for category 1 precision, non-precision approaches only. AHARs. This is another important thing that we want to talk about on the GFC 500 autopilot. The autopilot does not have an AHARs built into it. It must get it from somewhere else, maybe from a G5 or a 275 of Garmin, or maybe a G3X or something like that. And in a lot of cases, when we went through that supplement and we looked at that, we saw that certain things were engaged with the autopilot. So in some cases, we have 2 AHARs. Also on the flight test, this is in the ACS. So during the flight test, the pilot examiner may ask you to go ahead and demonstrate a partial panel. Well, what is a partial panel for an airplane that is equipped with so much redundancy? Well, it kind of depends on the airplane. And the whole idea here is to go ahead and put in a failure mode that is realistic to the situation that may occur in the real world. Okay, this is one I'm going to try to go through some of these glitches kind of fast because we're running a little bit late. But the KFC autopilot glitch, this was one that came out a number of years ago, and I worked with numerous people to try to get this corrected because this was a killer. So let's take a look at a couple of the things that made this thing happen. Okay, glide slope coupling could cause uncommanded climb in a stall. Okay, I'll cover that in just a second. We're dealing with Garmin 430s and 530s that have been upgraded from the standard to the WASP version and has this particular type of configuration. Occurs only on ILS. And it occurs when going from GPS to the VLOC mode. And it does not affect the GPS and LPV type of approaches. And the important thing here, the pilot must disconnect the autopilot immediately if this occurs. So here's basically what happens. So here the pilot is flying around on the autopilot. Maybe he's preoccupied with other things that are going on, getting everything set on up. He's gone around, he's done the procedure turn, he's back inbound. And as the airplane goes ahead and turns inbound, and the little box switches from GPS mode to the VLOC mode, as I had stated right there, the glide slope needle came from the bottom and went up. If altitude hold was on, altitude hold disconnected, the airplane went into a climb, and now guess what kind of speed that you're flying that airplane at? You're sitting there probably in a Bonanza somewhere, probably 110, 115 knots. You're not paying attention. All of a sudden, the airplane has pitched up, and it's going ahead and trying to catch that glide slope, which is now above you, and it goes ahead and stalls the airplane. So this was one of what we call a glitch. Here's another one, kind of an unusual one. Glide slope coupling does not occur during RNAV and GPS approaches if, and by the way, this is with the Garmin G950 Avionics suite, the pilot uses altitude pre-select at the time of departure. The pilot continues the entire flight, never turning off altitude pre-select. Upon reaching glide slope intercept, no glide slope intercept will occur on the autopilot. If the pilot disconnected anywhere along the flight, disconnected the altitude hold at any time during that particular flight, it will couple to the glide slope. So this is one of those things that the pilot needs to be aware of. Okay, this one here happened with the Avionic DFC autopilot and then one of their glitches. No glide slope coupling. And this, we were not sure on it, but they had an interface where if you bought an Avidyne IFD 540, it was a direct replacement for the Garmin 530W. We're not sure if it was a W or a straight one, but what happened in this situation, again with that autopilot would not couple. 6-pack, this is the instruments he had, CDI, and a flight director with a glide slope needle. And the pilot must disconnect the autopilot, reactivate the approach once the next waypoint becomes the final approach fix. And then the pilot needs to re-engage the autopilot in approach mode. And then, of course, the glide slope will couple. Okay, let's look at a quick situation. Now we got a couple of gotchas here. Let's do an ILS approach with the 500 autopilot. Okay, we're going to load the approach right here with a course reversal. And here is the initial approach fix here. We had the approach on up for Rhinelander, and Arsha is the initial approach fix. So we're going to do a procedure turn right here in this particular case. So we activate the approach. The autopilot is on in the approach mode. Altitude pre-select to the missed approach altitude. Now, this is one of the things that I always go ahead and do is I always put that missed approach altitude in the window when I'm going to go ahead and do an approach. And of course, it eliminates having to do one extra step later. And I use another device or another function to tell me when I get to my decision altitude. Okay, so in this particular case, what is that particular altitude right there? We put in 3,500. That is in the altitude pre-select, and that's to do the missed approach right there. Okay, what happens next? The aircraft crosses initial approach fix on the autopilot. The pilot needs to descend to the glide slope intercept altitude. There, we've got it right there of 3,500 feet. Aircraft flies outbound for about a minute. Does the outbound procedure turn? Inbound procedure turn? And guess what happens next? Well, it depends. The aircraft intercepts the localizer and turns in. That's what we wanted to go ahead and do. Okay, the aircraft flies straight through the localizer, and we see that happen. And the navigator does not go from GPS to VLOC, and the pilot has the option of going ahead and putting that in his navigator to have it do automatically. Okay. The autopilot goes in the roll steering. I see this quite often. And so here we are. The autopilot did not capture the localizer when it turned inbound. And number 3, it could be both 1 and 2 of the above. Okay, what can the pilot do to correct that problem? I hope we know how to hand fly the airplane, and sometimes we just have to disconnect the autopilot and take over and fly it manually. The aircraft continues inbound on the final approach fix. Glide slope needle comes alive and centers. That's a good thing. The altitude light on the GFC 500 goes out. The GFC 500 autopilot captures the glide slope. That's a good thing. No glide slope needle appeared. Nav and approach lights remain on the GFC 500 autopilot. I wrote an article in Midwest Flyer magazine about this about 3 months ago. And so there is a sensor in there that goes ahead and senses. And in this particular case, what it was is we had actually the localizer was working, but the glide slope was out of service. And that's what how the box treated it. And of course, no glide slope capture on the 500. Land or go missed. The aircraft is in position for a safe landing. Okay. The pilot, okay. Power and flap set, gear check down. We should have gotten that at the glide slope intercept, but that's a good place there to check and make sure that the gear is down. Autopilot is off. Okay, check the light. 200 feet, remember, from the requirements for that particular autopilot. Okay, here's where we run into a situation right here. It may not turn off the yaw damper when you turn off the autopilot. So check to make sure that the yaw damper light is off. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the missed approach. This is my take on that. Okay, the pilot, power up, pitch up, positive rate, gear up. What happens? Okay, well, look at the altitude there that it says where to climb to. Climb to 2,100 feet. Then a climbing right turn 3,500 feet direct to the NDB there. We'll love those NDBs. And hold. Okay, so this is basically what we're going to do. Well, now with the 500 autopilot, things happen differently than what you're used to with a lot of other situations. First of all, these are some of the things that can happen. Okay, the pilot does nothing. On my airplane, the box automatically switches and it automatically goes from the LPV to the GPS mode. The autopilot goes ahead and maintains what it's on. I did all the right things, and it automatically senses that the airplane did not land and automatically covers me to the missed approach. Now, we can have something else that could possibly happen there, depending on what you have. The pilot pushes the toga button. Okay, if you have a toga, and by the way, that stands for takeoff or go around, new technology that we've been hearing here recently. So you go ahead and you push that button, and what that will do then on the autopilot, it will take the flight director, pitch it on up for you. And in a lot of cases, it switches the autopilot to the roll mode. So that's one of the other items that comes up. But the pilot should make sure that if he didn't, he switches the navigator to the GPS mode for the missed approach. And again, the pilot switches the autopilot from roll to the nav mode. So it all depends on what equipment that you have in the airplane as to how you're going to go ahead and treat each one of those. Okay, I don't think we're going to have any time for questions and comments. Looking at the time here, I'm already ran over here. But again, I want to thank everybody, make some comments here on some of the things that you have possibly seen, and a couple other things here, some of my comments here for safety, things to remember, the last items here for flying a technically advanced airplane. Number one, a G1000 system again in a Piper is not the same as a G1000 system in a Cessna. Remember that, remember that, remember that. Here's another one. Don't fly in IMC conditions till you know all the glitches and got-yas of the exact airplane and avionics that you're going ahead and flying. And don't fly in IMC conditions anytime that the aircraft has been in for maintenance or a software update. A software update can change the whole characteristics of a particular autopilot or the equipment that's in it. What will tomorrow's avionics be? Well, it's hard to say, but I've been working on a couple of projects here where we can create holograms, maps, and also hooking up an AHRS to display a hologram of a screen. So a lot of new things in the works right here. And again, I want to give special thanks and credit to a lot of people that provided some of the information here to put this together. And again, thank you to Jurg and the FAA safety team. Jurg?
Thank you, Mick. Really appreciate you coming on tonight. And again, super information that I believe that many of the CFIs will have questions on. And I really, really would like to see you folks putting in the question box or email them to our team at the FAA, because we believe that this is the best way to get a feel for what's going on. We are out there doing something a little different with Mick coming on tonight. And again, what we were trying to do is combine the two areas that we believe will increase safety. And that is, you have to be proficient as a pilot, not only in knowledge, but also in the stick skills. And obviously we had the two extremes tonight, which is exactly where we know our pilots are weak, and our flight instructors are struggling with that as well themselves. So please let us know. Give us your comments. With that said, Mick and Bob and Steve, I'd like to thank everyone, and certainly love to hear what you have to say. And we will be having Mick back here for another presentation for part 2 as well. With that said, have a good night, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.